I stood in the center of my own empire, dressed in rags, while my top employee called me a broke loser to my face. She didn't just refuse to open the door to the $140,000 supercar. She called security to have me hunted out like an animal. She thought she was protecting the inventory. She didn't realize she was talking to the man who owns the air she breathes. The smell of premium Italian leather and freshly brewed espresso. It's a scent I've spent 20 years earning. Most people see the glass walls and the cold marble floors of Thorn Motorsports and see a kingdom. I see 20 years of washing cars in the freezing rain, starting as a lot porter and climbing every rung of the ladder until I own the whole damn building. I've been in the automotive business long enough to know every trick, every sales tactic, and every type of ego that walks through those doors. My philosophy has always been simple. Treat everyone who walks through the door like they are about to buy the most expensive car on the floor, regardless of how they look. I've sold six-figure convertibles to men in muddy work boots and refused service to guys in three-piece suits who were rude to my staff. Money spends the same, but respect is earned. But success has a shadow. We recently opened a new flagship location in a very affluent area. It's a beautiful building, espresso bars, glass walls, the works. To staff it, we transferred our best, but we had to hire externally to fill the gaps. That's where Victoria, the woman the staff whispered about, came in. She was poached from a competitor, and on paper she was a rock star. Her numbers were astronomical. She was moving units that had been sitting for months and upselling packages like a magician. However, along with those high numbers came the whispers. My general manager for that location, Julian, had mentioned that while her sales were great, her floor etiquette was aggressive. We had a few vague complaints about her attitude, but in the car business, a lot of bad behavior gets overlooked if you're bringing in revenue. But I don't like whispers. I wanted to see for myself what was going on. I decided to do a little field research. The setup was simple. I would visit the new location unannounced, dressed casually to see how customers are really treated. I didn't go full undercover boss with a fake mustache. I just didn't wear my usual suit. It was a Saturday, usually our busiest day, and I put on a pair of faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a pair of comfortable, slightly worn sneakers. I look younger than I am, and without the tailored suit and the expensive watch, I definitely don't look like the owner of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I look like a guy who might be there to deliver lunch or pick up a part for a 10-year-old sedan. I drove my wife's beat-up station wagon and parked it on the street so the valet wouldn't see me. I walked onto the lot and just started browsing. The standard at my dealership is that every customer is greeted within 2 minutes of entering. I wandered around the front line for about 5 minutes. Nothing. I could see the salespeople inside the glass wall standing in a huddle, laughing and drinking coffee. And then I saw her, Victoria. She was easy to spot, immaculately dressed, standing with a posture that screamed authority, holding a tablet like a weapon. She looked out at me, made eye contact, and then she turned her back. Strike one. I decided to force the interaction. I walked into the showroom, the AC hitting me like a wall of ice. The smell of the leather was strong. I walked straight over to the centerpiece of the showroom, a top-of-the-line sports coupe, fully loaded with a sticker price just north of $140,000. It was a gorgeous machine, aggressive styling, and a custom matte paint job. I started looking at the window sticker, reading specs I already knew by heart. That's when Victoria finally decided to make her move. She didn't approach me with a smile or a hand extended. She walked over with a quick, clicking stride, stopping 3 feet away and crossing her arms. "Can I help you find the exit?" she asked. Not welcome, not can I help you find a car. Just a cold invitation to leave. I looked up, keeping my face neutral. "Well, actually, I'm looking at this coupe. The specs on the new engine are impressive." She let out a sharp breath that was almost a laugh. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my sneakers and my t-shirt with pure disdain. She had immediately judged me as a window shopper who couldn't afford a cup of the espresso she was holding. The predator had found its prey, but she didn't realize she was looking at the lion who owned the pride. She stood there, draped in a designer blazer that probably cost more than the average person's monthly mortgage, looking at me like I was a stain on her polished marble floor. Victoria didn't see a man, she saw a type. She saw the faded denim and the slightly worn sneakers, and in her mind, the verdict was already in. To her, I was just a window shopper, a loiterer, a ghost in her machine of high-stakes commissions. "This vehicle," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that felt more like a slap, "is locked." She tapped her tablet against her palm with a sharp thud. "We keep it locked to prevent damage to the interior from casual onlookers." I tilted my head, looking past her at the aggressive styling of the Vance GTX. "I understand the policy for some," I said, my voice low and steady. "But I'm not an onlooker. I'm a buyer. I'd like to sit in the driver's seat to get a feel for the ergonomics and the driving position." She didn't just smirk, she let out a dry, rattling laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Sir, these vehicles start at $80,000, she said, pointing a manicured finger toward the far side of the room where the entry-level models sat. "And this specific coupe, it's significantly more, north of $140,000. She stepped closer, her perfume cloying and expensive. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the used lot down the street. They have financing options that might fit your situation better." The insult was calculated. It was designed to make me feel small, to make me turn around and walk out in shame. But I've been in this game for 20 years. I've felt the anger flare up before, and I've learned how to harness it. I didn't blink. I didn't move. "I'm not interested in the used lot, Victoria," I said, reading the name on her badge with a cold precision. "I'm interested in this car. Now, are you going to open the door, or do I need to find another salesperson who actually wants to do their job?" Her eyes narrowed into thin, venomous slits. I was no longer just a broke loser to her. I was an annoyance, a nuisance wasting her valuable time. She was the star of the flagship location, a top performer who had been crushing her numbers for 2 months. In her world, anyone who didn't look like a walking wallet was an obstacle to her next bonus. "Look," she said, her customer service facade finally cracking and falling away entirely. "I don't waste my time on people who aren't serious buyers. You're clearly just here to take pictures for your social media or to dream a little. We have actual clients coming in today, real people who can actually afford these cars." "I am a serious buyer," I replied, my voice hardening like steel being forged. "And I want to take it for a test drive, now." "Absolutely not," she snapped, her voice rising, catching the attention of a few wealthy clients near the espresso bar. "We don't do joyrides. Test drives are for pre-qualified buyers only." She crossed her arms tightly, her tablet clutched like a shield. "Unless you want to run a credit check right now and show me proof of income, you aren't touching these keys. In my dealerships, we are trained to qualify buyers for high-end test drives, but we do it with dignity. We ask for a license. We sit them down. We talk numbers in private. We don't demand a bank statement while standing in the middle of the showroom floor like we're interrogating a criminal." "You're refusing me service because of how I'm dressed?" I asked, giving her one last chance to pull back from the ledge. "I'm refusing you service because I know how to spot a fake," she said loudly, her voice ringing out with a terrifying confidence. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is wasting my time, and you, sir, you are a time waster." She had no idea. She was standing on a trapdoor, and she had just reached for the lever. The showroom air felt thin. It's funny how a room filled with multi-million-dollar machines can suddenly feel like a cage when the wrong person is holding the keys. Victoria stood her ground, her chin tilted upward in a display of arrogance that made my skin crawl. She wasn't just doing her job poorly. She was enjoying the power trip. She enjoyed being the gatekeeper of a world she thought I didn't belong in. "I'm going to ask you one more time, very clearly," I said, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with a quiet authority that usually makes men twice her size sit up straight. "Open the door to the GTX. I want to see if the interior carbon fiber package is as seamless as the design team promised." She scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "The design team? Oh, please, you've been reading the brochures, haven't you? You probably spent all morning memorizing terms you don't understand just so you could come in here and play pretend." She turned to a wealthy-looking couple nearby, who were watching the exchange with amused detachment. "I am so sorry for this, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. Some people have nothing better to do with their Saturdays than to harass professionals." Then she turned back to me, the mask of professional salesmanship completely gone. "You want to see the interior? Go look at it on a poster. You aren't a buyer, you're a tire kicker. A dreamer. And frankly, you're bad for the brand image just by standing here." "The brand image?" I asked, a cold smile touching my lips. "And what image is that, Victoria? That Thorn Motorsports only serves people who wear their net worth on their sleeve, that we turn away enthusiasts because they don't meet your arbitrary dress code." "It's not arbitrary," she snapped. "It's efficiency. I have a $3 million monthly quota. I don't hit that by entertaining every guy who walks in off the street in oil-stained jeans. Now leave, before I have to involve people who aren't as polite as I am." "Polite?" I let out a short, dry laugh. "You haven't been polite since I walked through that door. You've been a liability." That word liability seemed to trigger something in her. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. She was used to being the alpha in this room. She was the closer, the queen of the floor. To have a man she perceived as a nobody call her a liability was more than her ego could take. "That's it," she hissed. She reached for the radio clip to her waist, her thumb hovering over the talk button. "I gave you a chance to walk out with your dignity. Now you're leaving in handcuffs if that's what it takes." She keyed the mic. "Security to the main floor. We have a disruptive trespasser at the GTX display. He's refusing to leave and harassing the staff. I need him removed immediately." I didn't move an inch. I didn't reach for my phone to call my lawyer, and I didn't try to explain myself. I stood there, as still as the statues in a museum, watching her. I wanted to see how far she would go. I wanted to see the full extent of the poison she was injecting into my company. Across the room, I saw Marcus, one of the newer sales associates I'd met briefly at a regional training seminar 6 months ago. He was watching us, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked at me, then at Victoria, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He recognized something, maybe not my face, but the way I stood. The way I didn't flinch when the word security was shouted. "Victoria, wait," Marcus called out, stepping toward us. "Maybe we should just take a second, sir. If you're interested in the car, I can." "Stay out of this, Marcus," Victoria barked, not even looking at him. "Go back to the entry-level lot and sell a lease. I'm handling this. This gentleman needs to learn that Thorn Motorsports isn't a playground for the public." She looked at me, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "You wanted to see how we handle people like you? Well, look toward the front doors. Your ride is here." I turned my head slowly. The heavy glass doors were swinging open. 2 large men in black tactical polos were marching across the marble, their boots echoing like drumbeats. I knew them both. I had personally approved their security contracts. The trap was set. The line in the sand had been crossed, and Victoria was about to find out that the man she was trying to throw out was the man who owned the very floor she was standing on. The heavy glass doors of the showroom didn't just open. They hissed, a sound like a predator drawing a breath. 2 men in charcoal gray tactical polos marched across the marble. Their boots didn't squeal on the polished floor. They thudded, a rhythmic military beat that signaled the end of a conversation. I knew these men. I knew their service records, their families, and their character. Garrison, the lead guard, was a 6'4" wall of muscle with a jawline carved from granite and a prosthetic leg he'd earned in the Helmand province. He had been with Thorn Motorsports for 6 years. We had shared 100 cups of coffee in the early morning hours before the world woke up. To Victoria, he was just a tool, a blunt instrument to be used against those she deemed unworthy. "There he is," Victoria said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet triumph. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "He's been loitering for 20 minutes, harassing the clients and attempting to force entry into the display vehicles. I want him escorted off the property immediately. If he resists, call the police and file for criminal trespass." Garrison didn't look at her. He didn't look at the wealthy clients who had stopped their conversations to watch the show. His eyes were locked on me. As he got closer, I saw the exact moment the air left his lungs. His stride broke. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a permanent state of attention, suddenly slumped. He didn't reach for his handcuffs. He didn't reach for his radio. He stopped 3 feet away, his face turning a shade of pale that made Victoria's expensive foundation look vibrant. "Garrison," Victoria prompted, her brow furrowing. "What are you waiting for? Do your job." Garrison didn't even blink at her. He took a half step forward and lowered his head, his voice coming out in a raspy, terrified whisper. "Mr. Thorne." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence you find in the eye of a hurricane, deafening and heavy. The wealthy couple nearby stopped mid-sip of their espressos. Marcus, the junior salesman, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. "Hello, Garrison," I said, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly clear. "How's the leg holding up in this humidity?" It's fine, sir," Garrison stammered, his eyes darting to Victoria and then back to me. I didn't know you were scheduled for a site visit today. The log didn't mention." "I didn't want to be on the log, Garrison," I said, finally shifting my gaze to Victoria. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her hand, still pointing at me, began to shake. She looked at Garrison, then at the broke loser in the faded jeans, then back to Garrison. The math was finally starting to add up in her head, and the result was a 0. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered. The name seemed to taste like ash in her mouth. "That's right, Victoria," I said, stepping toward her. She instinctively recoiled, her back hitting the cold glass of the $140,000 car she had refused to unlock. The time waster, the dreamer, the man who signed the lease on this building, the man who designed the engine in this car, and the man whose name is currently on the top of your direct deposit every 2 weeks. Just then, the back office door flew open. Julian, the general manager, came running out, his tie half undone. He had heard the commotion over the security feed. He saw Garrison standing at attention. He saw Victoria trembling against the GTX, and then he saw me. Julian didn't say a word. He just stopped dead in his tracks and wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Julian," I said, not taking my eyes off Victoria. "I was just telling Victoria here that she's been very helpful. She's been protecting my inventory. She's been so protective, in fact, that she wouldn't even let the owner of the company touch the door handle." "Boss," Julian gasped, his voice cracking. "I can explain. We've been focusing on high-intent leads and—" "Save it, Julian," I snapped. The intensity in the room spiked. "We're going to your office. Now, Victoria, bring your tablet. Garrison, stay at the door. Nobody leaves and nobody else enters until I say so." I turned and walked toward the glass-walled office in the back. I didn't look back to see if they were following. In my house, when the king speaks, the servants move. And Victoria was about to realize that her top performer status was nothing more than a scrap of paper in a house that was currently on fire. Walking toward the back office, I could feel the eyes of every person in that showroom boring into my back. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash before the screaming starts. I pushed open the door to Julian's office. It was a space designed for power, high-back leather chairs, a mahogany desk, and a panoramic glass view of the inventory. I didn't sit in the guest chair. I walked right around that desk and sat in the center seat. I reclaimed my territory. Victoria entered last. She didn't walk, she shuffled. The woman who 5 minutes ago looked like she could conquer the world now looked like she was heading to her own execution. Her face was no longer pale. It was a sickly, translucent gray. The color of fear is a very specific shade, and it was currently painted all over her expensive makeup. "Sit," I said, one word, no heat, just a command. She sank into the leather chair, her hands clutching her tablet so hard the plastic groaned. Julian stood by the door, hovering like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. "Julian," I said, leaning back, "tell me about Victoria's performance." Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Sir, she's been our top producer since she arrived. She moved 22 units last month alone. Her closing ratio is nearly 40%. On paper, she's the best salesperson we've ever had at this location. On paper, I repeated. I looked at Victoria. She tried to find a spark of her old confidence, a flicker of that top performer ego to save her, but it was gone. On paper, a wildfire looks like it's creating a lot of energy, Julian, but in reality, it's just destroying everything it touches. I turned my attention to Victoria. You told me you don't waste your breath on fakes. You told me you can smell a broke person from a mile away. Tell me, Victoria, what does money smell like to you? Does it smell like a tailored suit? Does it smell like a gold watch? Because to me, money smells like sweat. It smells like the grease under a mechanic's fingernails. It smells like the dirt on a farmer's boots. She started, her voice cracking, barely a whisper. I thought I was protecting the brand. We get so many people who just come in to take pictures. I have to qualify them quickly. I thought. You didn't think, I interrupted. The intensity in my voice spiked. You judged. You didn't see a customer. You saw a hurdle. You've turned this showroom into an elite club where the only membership requirement is looking the way you think a rich person should look. Do you have any idea how many people you've insulted this month? How many millionaires in hoodies you've sent straight to the Mercedes dealership across the street? I pulled a folder from Julian's desk. It was a stack of customer feedback forms that hadn't been processed yet. I tossed them onto the desk in front of her. Read them, I commanded. She didn't move. Read them, I barked. The sound echoed through the glass walls. With trembling fingers, she picked up the top sheet. Her eyes darted across the page. It was a complaint from a local construction business owner who had come in looking to buy a fleet of executive SUVs. He'd noted that a blonde saleswoman had ignored him for 15 minutes while he stood in his work gear, then told him he was in the wrong building. That was a $400,000 deal, Victoria, I said, my voice dropping back to a terrifying low. He went and bought those cars from my competitor, not because we didn't have the inventory, but because you made him feel small. The tears began to well up in her eyes now, not tears of regret, but tears of a predator who realized she'd finally been caught in her own trap. She looked at Julian, pleading for support, but Julian looked at the floor. He knew better than to stand in the way of a landslide. Success without integrity is just a slow-motion failure, I said. And Victoria, you are the biggest failure I've seen in 20 years. I looked at the clock on the wall. The seconds were ticking away, and with every tick, Victoria's career at Thorne Motorsports was bleeding out. I let the silence sit in the room like a physical weight. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to hear the sound of her own heart racing against the quiet of the office. Victoria sat huddled in the chair, her expensive blazer now looking like a costume that didn't fit. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide and pleading, but Julian was a smart man. He had already distanced himself, standing near the window, staring out at the showroom like he was watching a ship sink from the safety of the shore. You know, Victoria, I began, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. I started this company in a garage with one set of tools and a floor that leaked oil every time it rained. I didn't have a marble showroom. I didn't have an espresso bar. All I had was my word and the way I treated the people who trusted me with their hard-earned money. I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the mahogany desk. When I hired you, I was told you were a closer. But there's a difference between closing a deal and closing a door. You've been closing doors on the very people who built this empire. You've been acting like a queen in a castle that isn't yours. Sir, please, she whispered, a single tear finally escaping and tracking through her foundation. My numbers. I hit the quarterly goal in 6 weeks. I've brought in more revenue than anyone else in this region. Doesn't that count for anything? Revenue? I scoffed, the word sounding like a curse. Revenue is a vanity metric if the cost is my soul. You think those 22 cars you sold make up for the 50 people you humiliated? You think a sales commission is worth the Thorne name being dragged through the mud of every country club and construction site in this state? I turned to Julian. "Julian, bring me her employee file now." Julian moved instantly. He pulled a thick folder from the cabinet and placed it on the desk. I flipped through it slowly. It was filled with accolades, certificates of achievement, salesperson of the month badges, glowing reviews from high-net-worth clients. It was a testament to how well she could play the game when she thought someone was watching. But then I reached the back, the internal notes section. "I see here 3 informal warnings about your tone with support staff," I said, my voice hardening. "I see a report from a lot porter who says you called him invisible. I see a note from the receptionist who said you made her cry because she didn't bring you the right brand of sparkling water." Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was realizing that the ghost in the showroom had been watching more than just her sales. "You aren't a top performer, Victoria," I said, closing the folder with a sharp snap that made her jump. "You are a cancer, and in my business, when we find a part that's corroded, we don't try to polish it. We don't try to fix it. We remove it so it doesn't rot the rest of the machine." You're firing me," she gasped. "Over a misunderstanding, over a t-shirt." "No," I said, standing up. I towered over the desk, the shadow of my frame falling across her trembling form. "I'm firing you because you're a bully. I'm firing you because you looked at a human being and saw a broke loser. And mostly, I'm firing you because you forgot the most important rule of Thorne Motorsports." I paused, leaning in until I was inches from her face. "The man in the t-shirt, he's the one who builds the world, the person in the suit. They're just the ones trying to sell it back to him." I looked at Julian and gave a single, curt nod. "Process the paperwork, Julian. Termination for cause. Gross misconduct and damage to corporate reputation. I want her desk cleared, her access revoked, and her name scrubbed from our systems by the time I finish my coffee." The room felt colder. The judgment was passed. Victoria looked down at her hands, the reality of her fall finally crashing down. She wasn't the queen of the floor anymore. She was just a woman in an expensive suit with nowhere left to go. The sentence had been passed. In the high-stakes world of luxury automotive sales, your reputation is your currency, and Victoria had just declared bankruptcy. I watched her from behind the mahogany desk, the desk she thought she'd be sitting behind one day as a manager. Her hands were trembling so violently she had to set her tablet down on the edge of the table. It made a small, pathetic clack against the wood. "Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension like a bone saw. "Escort her to her locker. I want every company-owned device, every key fob, and that gold-plated name tag on your desk in 5 minutes. Do not let her stop to speak to the other staff. Do not let her finish a client email. Her access ends the moment she steps out of this office." Julian nodded, his face a mask of grim professionalism. "Understood, sir. Victoria, let's go." She stood up, her legs looking like they might give way. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The arrogance that had fueled her all morning had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a woman who realized she had just become the broke loser she so despised. We stepped out of the office and onto the showroom floor. The atmosphere in the building had shifted. The news had traveled through the vents and across the marble like an electric current. The other salespeople, the ones she had bullied and looked down upon, stopped what they were doing. They stood by their desks, arms crossed, watching the fallen queen make her final walk. The walk from the back office to the front exit of a flagship dealership is exactly 85 feet. I know because I helped lay the tiles. To Victoria in that moment, I imagine it felt like 85 miles. As they passed the Vance GTX, the very car she had used as a shield for her elitism, Garrison was still standing there. He didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply stood at attention, his eyes fixed forward, a silent sentinel of the standards she had violated. Victoria glanced at him, her eyes pleading for a shred of the solidarity she had tried to force earlier when she called him to remove the loiterer. Garrison didn't give her an inch. He remained a wall of granite. Near the espresso bar, Marcus was talking to the wealthy couple, the Sterlings. They were looking at Victoria with a mixture of pity and disgust. The word was out. They knew they had been served by a woman who judged people by their shoes, and for people of real wealth, that is the ultimate sign of new money insecurity. "1 second, Julian," I called out, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The small group stopped near the heavy glass entrance doors. I walked toward them, my sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. Not my executive card, but the one we give to customers who are looking for our value pre-owned lot. The one 3 miles down the road where we sell the trade-ins. I held it out to her. "You told me earlier that I'd be more comfortable at the used lot," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I happen to know the manager there is looking for someone to wash cars and handle the night shift security logs. It's honest work. It's the kind of work that teaches you the value of a person before you see their bank account." She looked at the card, then at me. Her lip quivered. She didn't take it. "I didn't think so," I said, letting the card flutter to the floor. "Garrison, open the door for the lady. She's found the exit." Garrison stepped forward and pulled the massive glass door open. A gust of humid afternoon air rushed in, clashing with the sterile, expensive scent of the showroom. Victoria walked out into the heat, her heels clicking one last time on the Thorn property line. I stood there and watched through the glass. I watched her walk across the asphalt, past the rows of gleaming supercars, toward the street where she had parked her luxury SUV, a car she was likely going to lose the lease on within the month. She was gone, the poison had been drained, but the wound she had left in the company culture was still open, and I had work to do. The heavy glass doors settled into place with a soft, final hiss. Outside, Victoria was a fatting shadow in the afternoon heat. Inside, the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a vacuum waiting to be filled. I turned away from the door and looked at my team. They were all standing there, salespeople, mechanics in grease-stained coveralls who had wandered out to see the commotion, the receptionists, and Garrison. I looked at my own reflection in the side of a polished obsidian supercar. I still looked like a guy who had just finished mowing his lawn. Faded jeans, a dusty t-shirt, worn sneakers. I walked to the center of the showroom floor, right where the Vance GTX sat under the spotlight. I didn't climb onto a stage. I stood on the same marble they did. "Listen up," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the furthest corners of the service bay. Today was a failure, not just Victoria's failure, but a failure of the culture I built. We got comfortable. We started looking at people as numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings with dreams. I pointed toward the street. Victoria thought she was protecting this car from me. She thought she was the gatekeeper of a lifestyle. But she forgot that the only reason this building exists, the only reason any of you have a paycheck, is because someone somewhere worked a job they hated, saved their pennies, and decided to reward themselves with a piece of our hard work. I turned to Marcus, the junior salesman who had tried to intervene. Marcus stepped forward. He walked up looking nervous. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You were the only one who saw a person instead of a loiterer. You were the only one willing to risk Victoria's wrath to do the right thing. As of this moment, Victoria's office is yours. You're the new senior lead. Your first job? Teach this team that the Thorn standard isn't about the price of the suit. It's about the heart of the person wearing it." A small ripple of applause broke out, but I held up a hand to quiet them. "I don't care if a kid rolls up here on a rusty bicycle," I continued, my voice growing in intensity. "You give him a tour. I don't care if a woman walks in covered in drywall dust from a construction site. You offer her the best espresso we have. Because 10 years from now, that kid might be the next tech giant and that woman might be the CEO of the biggest firm in the city. And even if they aren't, they are human beings. And in this house, that is enough to earn our respect." I looked at Julian. "Julian, clear the books for the rest of the day. We're closed. I want the whole team in the lounge. We're going to talk not about sales quotas, but about how we treat people. And Garrison, great job today. Come see me tomorrow. We need to talk about that head of security opening at the North Plant. It's a promotion you've earned 10 times over." I walked back to the Vance GTX. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the master fob, and pressed the button. The car chirped and the dihedral doors swung upward like the wings of a predatory bird. I sat in the driver's seat, the same seat Victoria told me I wasn't qualified to touch. The engine roared to life, a mechanical growl that vibrated in my chest. I didn't drive it out to show off. I drove it out to remind myself that the machine doesn't know how much money you have. It doesn't care about your clothes. It only cares about how you handle it. Life is the same way. They say you can tell the true character of a person by how they treat those who can do absolutely nothing for them. Victoria looked at me and saw nothing. She didn't realize that by dismissing the man in the t-shirt, she was dismissing her own future. Never judge a book by its cover, because sometimes the person you're trying to kick out of the building is the one who owns the ground you're standing on. If this story reminded you to stay humble and keep your eyes open, then you're the kind of person we want in this community. Don't let the gatekeepers win. Hit that like button if you think Victoria got exactly what she deserved, and subscribe to join us for more stories of justice, high stakes, and the truth behind the curtain. Have you ever been judged because of how you were dressed? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay sharp and keep your head held high, no matter what you're wearing.